My name is Stellan Windhagen, and I'm really happy to see you here. This event is going on from 4 to 6:30. Just some household remarks to begin with. This is then a collaboration between the Resistance Studies Initiative here at UMass, which I'm directing, and CEPA, the Center for Education Policy Advocacy here at UMass. So it's focusing on civil disobedience, and we are going to have some presentations in the beginning where you will hear something about what civil disobedience is, historical examples and so on. And you will also hear from historical examples from here at UMass of civil disobedience, as well as the strong campaign that was last year with Divest. After that, we'll have group discussions, right? So I think it will be covering quite a lot of things. And people that made this possible, that have co-sponsored us today, is the SBS. It's the UMass Amherst Library Sustainability Fund and Special Collections at University Archives, and the UMass Civic Engagement and Service Learning, and the Department of Sociology. Right. I also want to mention that we are having in the Resistance Studies Initiative a couple of more events coming up. One on revolutions on December 4 with John Higginson. And then one on December 5 with Timothy Wallis, who is working with the ban of nuclear weapons and a campaign of resistance to uphold that ban, which obviously the United States is already violating. You know, there is an international ban now of nuclear weapons. So that on December 5 is about that. And we are also circulating some name lists here for if you're interested to get more propaganda from us around resistance. You can sign up for the listserv and also check your name here if you registered beforehand. So that's circulating. All right. Okay. So then, I want to say some words first about civil disobedience. And then I want to show you, I think, a very powerful video from the civil rights movement and the Nashville campaign that they used a very interesting form of civil disobedience. Right? So that's the plan. So civil disobedience then is a particular form of activism, which we need to kind of highlight what's characteristic with it. It has a very long history, as long as recorded history in the world, actually. We can find examples. And I will also try to highlight how it can be a very effective revolutionary approach to politics, and why that's so, and some of the rich variation of tactics that people are using. And also some recommendations emanating from the knowledge of how people have been using it beforehand. So I'm going to speak quickly, and the slides are going to be up very shortly. So if people want to have a copy of the PowerPoints, you just send me an email. Otherwise, buckle up and have the seatbelts on. All right, the definition. There's at least 35 definitions out in the literature about what is civil disobedience. And I don't think there is one that is absolutely correct. Our approach to definitions, I think, should be like what is most useful for what we want to do. So if you regard definitions as a tool, I'm suggesting one now that is quite established, of 4 criteria. You're challenging the law. Very often you're breaking the law, but sometimes you get acquitted in court, and then you're actually having the law on your side. So it's a challenge where there's a risk of getting punished. You do that because you have an idea that you have the right on your side for some reason. Argue against that law with your own idea. And you apply nonviolent means, at least in the way that you're not threatening to hurt humans, And then this is done in a public way, where people take responsibility for what they're doing. So this is a very particular form of acting that has a history from Tolstoy, Thoreau, that actually came from the Boston area, and people like Gandhi and Martin Luther King. And this definition here that I'm suggesting is one that is built on that tradition. But as I say, there's many other traditions as well. All right, so there's been quite a bit of research trying to highlight what is the importance and how is this form of resistance working. I'll lift up some things here from the literature. And I'm mentioning here some sources of key literature there. But basically, we are seeing from the research that civil resistance campaigns building on civil disobedience and that form of resistance is double as effective compared to armed resistance in overthrowing regimes. Even if that is a militarized dictatorship, nonviolent means are double as effective. If we look on statistics the last 100 years and over 350 cases. If you're interested in creating not just an overthrow of a government that you dislike, then nonviolent means in the resistance in form of civil disobedience is actually also increasing the likelihood of producing democracy and civil peace as a result of that overthrow 10 times more than armed forms of resistance. And we're also seeing that the movement mobilization of people are the historical reason why we are getting democratization in countries around the world. And it's not state reform as people would tend to believe. Sometimes it is state reform that gives us democratization, yes. But the typical is that it comes from below through the pressure from movements. That's the tendency we see. Lastly, the research is also showing that when the state is using heavy, violent repression against activists applying this form of resistance, it can backfire in the way that if the general population perceive the violent repression against the nonviolent activists as being an unjust repression, then it undermines the legitimacy and the standing of that state in a way that it becomes a problem for them. All right, so that's kind of interesting and indicating results from research. But I'm basically going to talk about the practical experience from movements, what they have learned. I just want to highlight that this has been used in so many different areas against racial systems. We have seen that in anti-colonial struggles, in the civil rights, and in the struggle against slavery internationally. Against patriarchal systems, it's been used with civil disobedience as well, with success. Against class systems, like we have seen with the European trade unions. So it's a wide variation. And then you could perhaps question why. Why is it so powerful? And I think we need to spend a little time on that. So according to the thinking of Martin Luther King, civil disobedience highly dramatize the conflicts by showing the injustices and the visions that people have of another way of living. And it's showing through an example what people could do. So even if a small group is doing civil disobedience, it can be a threat to a state and the power order because it can quickly spread and thousands can do it. And then you're building a pressure. And what Martin Luther King was talking about in his letter from a Birmingham jail of creating tensions and a moral political crisis in society, right? But I think fundamentally we're talking about here that people are, through civil disobedience, building a kind of a power from the bottom up. By cooperating with them, with each other, while non-cooperating with the laws of that state. And that creates something that is potentially very revolutionary if you get it into mass actions. I'm not saying that it's always working, it doesn't always work, but if it is applied in a sustained, strategic way, according to the context and the dynamic and the power base of your opponent, I think it can be tremendously effective. Because, and this is the basic assumption, every power, even the state power, even Washington as a state center in this country, depends on resources given through our work, our participation as citizens, our obedience as participants in the economic, political, cultural production of this society. All these resources are created by ordinary people. So if they withdraw that, and if they don't follow the law, then we have a very strong power being exercised from below. You could describe this as power being dependent on the pillars of support, and that you can undermine that through civil disobedience. And I think that's the reason why even militarized authoritarian regimes end up in negotiations with popular big movements that are applying civil disobedience. So you can describe this in this way. If you have the power in this kind of Greek temple version, where people pay taxes, people are working in the factories, people are doing military service and police service, they are generally obedient, civilly obedient, and they serve in the bureaucracy. That kind of upholds the power, right? But if you then start to have tax refusal, people refuse to pay the taxes, and you continue with a general strike in society, and you have a massive civil disobedience campaign, and people even in the bureaucracy are starting to refuse to do their job, you're getting an unstable power. And when you get the cracks in the security system, when you have police and military defecting from their jobs, or refusing to fire at civil activists that are nonviolent, or there is a general spread of a lack of morale in these security forces, then a regime will enter a negotiation with the opposition. A stupid regime will just try to hang on and increase the repression. And if the movement is able with the important thing of sustaining their resistance, the regime will fall. We have seen this happening so many times, and I won't go through all the examples, but I'll just give you some indication here. Here are some of the 40 cases we have seen the last 60 years. Of successful regime changes where ordinary popular movements, people like us in the room here, have mobilized in civil disobedience and overthrown their regimes. However, this is not always successful. I'm not trying to say here this civil disobedience is a magic tool. I think we have to use it with skill, and we have to think about how we do it. Because there is sophisticated repression as well, cooptation and manipulation that happens, and regimes, they learn how to do this. We have seen that in so many cases. So for example, in Burma, 2007, with a violent crackdown on the monks, and then their creation now of some kind of hybrid between democracy and dictatorship that they are experimenting with now. It's a way for the military to stay in power. Or in Egypt, how we saw that after a successful overthrow of the regime, there was a new military coup happening. And now the military is ruling again. So there is not like a sure path, so we need to kind of build, I think, on the experiences of these movements. And it's now when I'm going to highlight some of the things that movements that use civil disobedience a lot have lifted up. All right. Strategic planning in campaigns where people set goals, make plans. Combination of methods where the civil disobedience is combined with also other forms of methods, right? A campaign is a focused way of a series of actions where you will use different kinds of methods at the same time over a period. The role of creativity and innovation, which is one of my favorite things, I will say a little bit more about soon. But that we build on learning from the experiences of how other people have struggled is really key here. So we need to practice evaluation, research, and training to learn the skills. So let me highlight some things here then. Action preparation. So from the civil rights movement from the 1940s and onward, there is a tradition of training, practical skill training, where people are testing out in role plays, exercises of different kind, how to do things. This is the same as the military and the police are doing, right? They will not do any kind of operations where they go into a hostage situation without having practicing that for several times. Everyone knowing what to do. We have tested different versions. And we can and should do the same. A second point is the use of action teams. So when you are maybe hundreds of people acting together, you divide them up in smaller groups of maybe 5 to 10 people, where you can build trust, where you can divide up roles, where you can keep support to each other. This makes it possible to do mass actions. So this was pioneered by the anti-nuclear activists here in Seabrook in Connecticut in '77, when there were 2,000 people divided up in these small action teams, which showed that it was possible to have a very decentralized action form without having major charismatic leaders, but instead having very decentralized, active, small groups. Where you can then divide up in roles where people as individuals or groups are doing different things, like being medics, legal support, media representatives, and all that kind of things. All of these things that you would practice and train so that you do it good. All right? A third thing that activists are using when they use civil disobedience is action discipline through guidelines. Here's an example from one action, mass actions that's been in the US, of what kind of guidelines people are using. So these guidelines, they're not there to force everyone to be a pacifist. It's not about that at all. It's only about that you agree upon certain kind of rules. How will you act in this action? So if I give another example from Seattle, this was actually something of a small guideline with only 4 points that was agreed between people that came from the Antifa that absolutely not believe in nonviolence, but acted together with other people that did believe in nonviolence. But they were agreeing that at a certain time, at a certain space, they will follow these guidelines, because that would make sense to have a discipline of what we're doing. We can know and trust each other what we're doing at this occasion. And then people can have other ideas of what is needed to be done in other situations. Right? It's just simply a matter of being consistent and having an idea, a plan of what to do. And in order to protect that from people that maybe want to use the opportunity to do things differently, there is a tradition in these actions, particularly in mass actions, to have trained activists that also intervene in a creative way if there is someone that is breaking these rules of how to act together. They're often called peacekeepers or marshals or so. And then you need to build mass. You need to be a lot of people, right? That's a key thing in order to make civil disobedience work. And one very promising way to do this is to use what's called a pledge of resistance. So the idea of that is that you sign up to do civil disobedience and take the risks of what that means, to be non-violently breaking the law, and what that could lead in forms of punishments and so on. But you only do that if, for example, 200 other people also do that. Because then it would be more meaningful, and people will feel the support and the collective strength of acting together. So this was used, for example, as a way to deter the United States from invading in Nicaragua in the 1980s, where thousands of people signed a pledge, went through trainings, and prepared for doing civil disobedience in the case if the United States would invade in Nicaragua. And that's been argued. It's hard to prove in evidence, but it's been argued that that played some kind of important role in deterring the United States from doing it. All right, so basically I'm arguing that if you want to apply civil disobedience, you take small steps. You begin small, low risk with preparation. You evaluate and adjust. You escalate the resistance. You try to build mass through developing your creativity and supportive ways of doing this, because it's risk-filled. There will be risks in doing it. And being creative, I think, is really essential here. So I'll say something more about that as well. And then I'll show the video of this impressive campaign in Nashville in the civil rights movement. All right. I think we need to be creative because otherwise we are predictable. Otherwise we will be easy to deal with for those that have interest in undermining our resistance. And there are many ways to do that. Here's one example when you combine, the academic tradition of presenting papers, drinking tea and socializing, talking between professors and students. We know all about that, right? But if you take that model of academics doing their academic work, and you put that instead as a blockade of a nuclear weapon base, where you have researchers presenting their results, and people discussing that on the street, you're at the same time doing civil disobedience as you're also discussing your research that is showing the need of doing civil disobedience against nuclear weapons, right? So this is an academic seminar blockade, which I think is a creative version. Another one would be if you have a theater collective that is an anti-capitalist one, like in Copenhagen in the 1970s, you can invade a city with a Santa army. And you can try to incite workers to go on strike. And you can do as these Santas did in Copenhagen. You go into the shopping malls and you take down products from the shelves and you give to people and say, "Merry Christmas." Then the police might come and arrest you, but it is a point that is being made by the Santas. Or if you have a World Trade Organization that is putting priority of trade and not environment, you might have the turtles striking back and blockading the whole conference, as they did in Seattle 99, and totally closed down the biggest economic institution in the world, the World Trade Organization, so it totally collapsed. So you could say it was the revenge of the nature. Or you can do as the Reclaim the Street people in the UK, that is trying to reclaim back our streets, our cities from the corporate control and power by creating street parties and using the streets to your own things. So they were thousands of people that used, for example, big motor highways as a dancing floor. And there were so many people that the police couldn't stop them. And they were dancing for so many hours so that people could actually use jackhammers and dig down into the concrete of the motorway and plant trees in the middle of the motorway. And the clandestine insurgent rebel clown army is also putting a lot of more of drama and a different flavor to our kind of activism by jokingly commenting on police and military in their activism, which is also very helpful, I think. Another example is the critical mass. Here's me and my daughter participating in New York. Critical mass is an amazing kind of activism where you make sure that you're not calling to a protest, not even an action, but you're calling for a bike day, right? And it's not illegal to bike together in the same way as you could be a lot of cars creating congestion in New York. You can also be 1,000 that is on a bike tour. And then it becomes difficult for the police to arrest you. And if they do, it becomes very difficult for the judges to sentence you because you're actually just out biking. So I think it's a very creative understanding of how the law works and where the activists are using that in a creative way. And they are super creative when it comes to biking. They're really nerds. All kinds of strange bikes I encountered when I was there. My favorite, the conference bike. So you can have a meeting with your affinity group and you can plan the next action while you're biking. Or you can do like the Basque activists. If you don't like the military headquarters in your area, well, you gather a group of workers and you take the hammers and you start to tear down the building. Or you can do as my friends in Norway. If you're against the thing that people are ending up in prison because they have the consciousness of that they don't want to serve in the conscription in the army, like in Norway, these activist friends, when they had one of their colleagues inside of the prison, they escaped into the prison saying, we have the same consciousness and we should also be put in jail or he should be thrown out. So we demand to be jailed together with him or that you let him go. So it created a chaos at this prison when people were actually trying to escape into it. And the director of the prison entered into dialogue and he said, I'm sorry, the law is forbidding me from putting you in jail, so you have to leave. And they said, well, we refuse, we are already here now. So the police had to carry them out of the prison, right? So how do you punish these people afterwards? If you put them on trial, how do you punish them, right? Are you going to give them prison? Right. So by using humor, you can disarm the threat or the fear that exists for people of making them being obedient. Here's one of my favorites. It's a blockade of a nuclear base in Germany in a campaign I was working with. So they're blockading the base for 2 days by playing classical music. The first day, the police was just listening. The second day, they decided they had to arrest them. Here's another very creative one. You know, you have heard about strikes. You refuse to work. Okay, we know about that one. But what about the reverse strike that Danilo Dolci did in Sicily, Italy, where the town was not serving people, but they were so corrupt, so even though they were taking taxes, they didn't do what they were supposed to do. They didn't repair the roads. They didn't fix the lights. So people went together and took the material directly from corporations, and they started to repair the roads and do the street lights. Kind of illegal, but something that got enormous popular support. Here is Dolci being arrested because of that. And you can also operate with thinking about how to increase the contrast between you and the militarized police, like in Standing Rock, where the water protectors were very much getting a worldwide support, I think because they were doing something that people felt was so genuinely right and was so clearly a contrast to the militarized occupation of Standing Rock, forcing for the pipeline to be built. All right. So that's my quick take on resistance of civil disobedience. And let's see here what people did in Nashville, Tennessee. How do I get it to start now? Ah, there we have it. Thank you.
60 years after Gandhi's struggle in South Africa, his ideas found new followers.
Maybe higher? Debbie, you know we can get higher volume? On the table. This one? Yeah.
Many are shocked by the suffering system.
I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and although I experienced segregation there, it was not the overt kind where there were signs on water fountains and on restaurants. It was humiliating.
Well, Nashville was a totally segregated city. It was as segregated as Johannesburg, the height of apartheid. It was a city of two races. There was virtually no contact between the white community and the black community. In school, in neighborhoods, in jobs, in church, Nashville was a totally and completely segregated city, and for the most part, totally satisfied and happy with that.
Students at American Baptist College in eastern Nashville know that segregation is being challenged, that some are working against the violent repression, even lynchings that enforce it. They want to join the struggle.
We've been taught one thing in the school about the Declaration of Independence, about the Bill of Rights, about the Constitution. And then in the real world, we were living something else.
James Lawson, a Methodist minister from Ohio, soon gives Nashville's students a chance to take part. The soft-spoken Lawson is 30 and has spent 3 years teaching in India, where he studied the work of Mohandas Gandhi. In a small church near the Fisk campus, Lawson has started a series of evening workshops on nonviolent action.
Now tonight we have a most important business to try to accomplish.
Jim Lawson's manner is cool. His objective is breathtaking: to eliminate segregation. His classes attract Nashville's brightest students.
A good friend of mine in Alabama here last April was taken out by the KKK and beaten on a tree, tied to a tree, beaten by chains and whatnot.
I thought nonviolence would not work, but I stayed with the workshops for one reason, and that is because they were the only game in town. That was the only group even trying to do anything to combat segregation that I knew about.
He started praying, Father, forgive these men.
Jim Lawson has been encouraged to come south by Martin Luther King Jr., who says the civil rights movement needs leaders who understand non-violent strategy and tactics.
Then they started protesting. You can't pray that prayer, they said. And then others said, yes, the man who's going to die has the right to pray any way he wants to pray. And this immediately started a division among them.
We took the whole group through a holistic view of nonviolence, its history, its roots in the Bible, its roots in Christian thought, the methods of nonviolence. We told the stories of nonviolence. And I stressed the Gandhian idea of our being engaged in experiment.
It may have much more meaning to the attacker if, as he strikes you on the cheek, you're looking him in the eyes.
Unfortunately, the concept of nonviolence for many people is that you get hit on one cheek, you turn the other cheek, you don't do anything. But nonviolence means fighting back. But you're fighting back with another purpose and with other weapons. Number one, your fight is to win that person over. And that is a fight. That's a struggle. That's much more challenging than fisticuffs.
Right. Okay. Peggy?
Tim, if I was being beaten, what is it that I would be able to do?
We said we were going to desegregate downtown Nashville. Our first step was going to be desegregate lunch counters and restaurants. That, of course, was the first Gandhian step. That was the first step of nonviolence. To research and examine and focus on an issue. Choose a target, choose an issue.
Now, let's see.
Months before going to the lunchrooms, Lawson begins preparing them.
A bunch of niggers.
Well, look at the 8 balls all lined up.
Hi there, Jungle Bunny.
He's so dark, he's making the whole place dark.
He wants them to have experienced both physical and verbal attacks, and to learn how to resist the impulse to run or fight back.
Now let's see what we've learned from this to us as to how we might act non-violently. What are the basic problems here so far?
You cannot go on a demonstration with 25 people doing whatever they want to do. They have to have a common discipline. And that's a key word for me, that the difficulty with nonviolent people and efforts is that they don't recognize the necessity of fierce discipline and training and strategizing and planning and recruiting and doing the kinds of things that you do to have a movement. That can't happen spontaneously. It has to be done systematically.
They stage their first sit-in on a Saturday, when they are sure to be noticed.
We spent many, many hours anticipating some of the opposition. And we knew that one of the things that they would say, we don't want to sit next to dirty people while we have lunch. So one of the ways we combated that was by having a dress code.
We had been told it was a possibility of being arrested, but we went to the lunch counter. We took our seats. We sat in a very orderly, peaceful fashion.
They are not surprised when they are refused service.
I said, I'm sorry, our management does not allow us to serve niggers in here.
Store managers quickly close the dining areas, but the students remain until closing time, reading and doing homework. There is no violence, and no one is arrested. The sit-ins make page 10 of the Sunday paper. City editor John Siegenthaler remembers the reaction.
The reaction initially was sort of shock and maybe even some humor. I mean, who do they think they are? What do they think they're doing? We knew it was a news story, but didn't really know how to cover it.
Local businesses take a predictable position. They'll close down before they'll serve black customers. A week later, the students are back. They provoke curiosity and verbal abuse, but no arrests. Whites still think the sit-ins are a passing fad, hardly a threat to the status quo. On the third Saturday, they are ready to target a total of 6 stores.
Let each person now get himself or herself a partner that they will stick with. Now, we don't want a white person with a Negro of the opposite sex, because we don't want to fight that battle.
We were told in advance that day that they were going to allow the hoodlums to beat us up, and then the policemen were going to arrest us. So we need to be prepared to get beaten and arrested. So that was a condition under which we went down.
By now they're well prepared. Each group includes a leader and observers who will go back to the church. Observers are carrying telephone numbers for ambulance services and a pocket full of telephone change. As they enter the stores, the second and third waves of demonstrators stay out of sight, ready to move in when the first group is arrested. As predicted, the police hang back for the first 15 minutes.
Went and asked each and every one of them separately to leave. They didn't leave, so I instructed the men to place them under arrest. We placed them under arrest. When we cleared the stools, some more colored boys and girls and white boys and girls got on the seats.
It really surprised the police. They thought they had lowered the boom. And when they turned around and looked and saw a lunch counter, once again, full of Negro students, you could just see that they kind of looked at each other out of the corners of their eyes as though, do you see this? What will we do now? And there was still another group ready to take their places.
You're in jail. I'm joking.
We had a philosophy which was a power of nonviolence. And that kind of power we felt was more forceful than all of their police force, all of their lawmakers, and all of their dogs or billy clubs or jails, and that our capacity and willingness to suffer outweighed any power they had.
Mass arrests are a victory for the students. Reporters realize they are covering a story of national significance.
I mean, it's like being a war correspondent in your own hometown. The only thing you knew was that the war was on, that the weapon of nonviolence was winning over violence, and that this was a historic moment, however it came out. I think there was a sense of history there that we all understood.
At police headquarters on Monday morning, the students are still behind bars. On principle, they have refused bail. In just 48 hours, their small student movement has inspired thousands. Now the city's black community has joined in the struggle, organizing, raising money, recruiting lawyers. Alexander Looby is Nashville's most prominent black lawyers, and he has organized local lawyers to defend the arrested students.
People couldn't believe that these young, well-dressed, innocent college students are being arrested and put in jail. They didn't like it. And the city, African-American population was mobilized in such a fashion. And the movement spread through the city of Nashville like wildfire.
As the crowds wait to see what the city will do, the mayor speaks to reporters.
Anyone violating the law will be arrested. This must be so.
By emphasizing law and order, the mayor takes sides with the store owners. In fact, the arrested students have broken no law, and none of the white attackers has been arrested.
The city and police were ill-prepared for a mass civil disobedience effort. They had anticipated that once the violence took place and the arrest began, our movement would dissipate, would be chased away, because that's the purpose, after all, doing the violence, and it's the purpose of doing the arresting. It's hopeful that then whatever this is will vanish, and that's the end of it. That didn't happen.
A week later, nothing has changed. As the students return to the lunch counters, the city has only one answer: more arrests. Now in the national spotlight, the movement is deluged with new recruits. Jim Lawson's workshops expand to meet the demand. Nashville's churches provide meeting space, telephones, mimeograph machines. Now they must get the message out, far beyond Nashville.
We were not simply addressing our immediate opponents. What we were doing was addressing the larger audience, the nation, the world. Because the strategy in nonviolence is that you educate a large number of constituents and win them on your side. In fact, even though we as African Americans were a minority, no change could take place unless you have the sympathy of the majority, if not the active participation.
The students know that sympathy by itself may not be enough. Taking advantage of the outrage their arrests have provoked, they escalate the conflict. Sit-ins continue, but a new tactic is added: a boycott of the downtown shopping district. Picketers ask customers not to patronize stores whose lunch counters are segregated. The students have created a momentum, now embraced by the larger community, as black clergy urge their congregation to stay away from the downtown shopping district altogether.
It allowed for the whole community to be participants in the movement, because that's one of the things that we in the nonviolent world always teach, namely that in the nonviolent movement Everyone can be a participant. Children can participate, women can participate, men can participate, young people, old people. Everyone can do the work.
As the boycott takes hold, the sit-ins and arrests continue. The conflict becomes a seemingly permanent fact of life in the downtown shopping district. Picketing and boycotting provoke a racist backlash. But the counter-demonstrations backfire. Frightened white people begin avoiding the downtown area, unwittingly joining the boycott. A Fisk University economist calculates that some downtown stores have lost up to 40% of their business. As Easter approaches, the usual surge of spring buying never happens. Among blacks, the boycott is estimated at 98%.
That was a powerful message sent to the white community that, you know, it's one thing just to deal with these students on a Saturday to Saturday basis and lock them up and let them get bailed out, and we'll try them and sentence them to $50 fines and that sort of thing. But another thing, when you go down there and there's nobody on the street.
At Easter, the counters are still segregated.
So I will break there because of the interest of time. But basically, this campaign was successful and made the shops to desegregate. And after that followed other desegregation and also other sit-in campaigns spread all over the country, where thousands of people did the same. All right. So I think then I'm giving over the word to our first presentation. Sorry? The pizzas came. Oh, yeah. Thank you for reminding me. We have the pizzas, and then we have the next presentation. Cool. All right. So there is pizza for people over there.
So me and Talia are up here. We want to give you all a brief history about civil disobedience at UMass, because UMass does have a very rich history of civil disobedience and students coming together, demanding change and being successful in that. I know when me and Talia were doing our research in this, it was very inspiring to see students before us doing a lot of great things and being successful in that and organizing, and it was just really nice to see that. So we just wanted to give a brief overview of just different instances of civil disobedience at UMass, starting with 1969 to 70, the Afro-Am takeover. So in the early 60s, there weren't many African American students on campus. In 1965, there were 50 African American students out of the 18,000 students on the university's campus. And most of those students were primarily graduate students. Black faculty got together and they wanted to start a Black Studies department, but there was a lot of opposition from white faculty who didn't think that was needed at all. So they decided to create this program called the Committee for the Collegiate Education of Black Studies. And they created this in 1968. And after they created that committee, they presented the university with a list of 120 names of potential Black students who have submitted applications to come to university, and they asked the university to meet the demand of accepting half of those students. And at first, the university was apprehensive of doing that, but the 5 Black faculty members said that they were going to quit if they didn't do that. So the university finally gave it in, and they admitted a group of 51 African American men and 70 women for the fall semester of 1968. And on April 22nd, 1970, the UMass Board of Trustees approved the Afro-Am Studies Department, which was named after W.E.B. Du Bois, and it was after the faculty and students got together and pushed for the administration to do this. One of the big additions that came with the Afro-Am department was the establishment of the New Africa House. So the New Africa House now is located in Central. That building used to be called the Mills House, and that was a dormitory for students living in Central Res area. So how that all came to be, There was an incident where the Strat Boys chased these group of black students back into their dorm, and they lived in Mills House. And when they got to the dorm, they barricaded themselves inside their own dorm, and the white students left. And they decided to go around to their dorm, asking students, hey, we have to get together, like, this is, like, fucked up, like, we're experiencing racism on this campus every single day. And a quote that we found from our research was, the students went all around their dorms and they were asking people, either you're with us or you're against us. And if you're with us, you should be here, and if you're not, then dip. So a lot of white students left, and more black students from around the university came and occupied the Mills House, and they demanded it to be turned to New Africa House, so it can be a center for black students to come together and just cultivate more community and navigate a very white campus. So that's how the Mills House turned into the now New Africa House. In 1970, the Vietnam War was happening, and in 1970, President Nixon ordered troops to invade Cambodia, and that started huge nationwide protests. A lot of students got involved on campus here. Students went on strike, they didn't go to class, they held rallies, gatherings, they passed out flyers, they utilized the Daily Collegian, which is our university's newspaper, to recruit more people to get involved in the strike. And it's estimated about 5 million people worldwide, 5 million students, nationwide, excuse me, joined the movement. And after the incident that happened at Kent State on May 4th, 1970, after the National Guard shot into a crowd of students, killing 4 and injuring 9, that sparked even more protest. And UMass students occupied the ROTC building, known as the Dickinson building, in response to these killings. And they were protesting the killings, but broadly they were protesting the presence of ROTC and the university's ties with military training, because at this time a lot of male students on campus actually were forced to take ROTC classes, so they were protesting that as well. And after all these protests were happening, students weren't going to classes, so they decided that for that semester, at the end of the semester, students would receive a pass for missing classes in all finals. And this was not only unique to UMass, a lot of other universities around the country did the same thing because students were not going to class. In 1978, women occupied the Daily Collegian from April 30th to May 12th, and they were demanding more women news. And this means just more articles like written by women, talking more about women's issues affecting them at the time, because at the time the Daily Collegian was made up of mostly men, mostly white men, and they were leaving the voices out of women. So they got together and they occupied for 2 weeks, yeah, about 2 or 3 weeks. After that, 1979. I thought this one was particularly really cool, the Amherst nursing home strike, because it involved the community and students coming together to support their community members. So the Amherst nursing home, they had workers who worked for minimum wage, and they went on strike and demanded higher wages and more benefits. And 300 students and community members came together in support. They blocked doors, they lay down in the driveway, and they were arrested. A lot of them were arrested, but it did end up being successful. They ended up getting more wages and more benefits, and it just really showed like the power of students like interacting with the community and supporting the community, because I think many times that we can get lost in just the UMass bubble and not realize we are part of a wider Amherst community and we have to support each other. So this was a really great instance of that. And in 1985, when South Africa was still in apartheid, students protested the university's failure to follow its own policy, requiring it to divest from companies cooperating with the apartheid regime. So that was successful, although 32 students were arrested with that as well. It did gain a lot of nationwide support. It drew a lot of attention to UMass, and they successfully divested from South African corporations that were cooperating with apartheid.
In 1986, there were a lot of CIA protests on campus because students were protesting CIA recruitment here based on the CIA's like misconduct in Nicaragua. Recently, at that time, they had arrested I believe his name is Rick Ross, a black man from California who is operating the largest cocaine ring, and they found out that one of his suppliers was actually on a CIA payroll, and so they were like, okay, what's going on here? And so they protested CIA recruitment on campus, which I believe was happening in Goodell. And so they were successful in that they were able to stop the recruitments that day, and then all 68 students, of the 68 students that were arrested, 13 of them decided to go to court and fight their charges. And so basically their defense argued that even though they were guilty, they didn't argue that they weren't guilty of committing a crime of trespassing, they argued that their protesting was necessary because the CIA had created a much bigger crime because of what they were doing in Nicaragua, and they won their court case, which was like unprecedented. Everyone was like, shook F. Like, what do you mean we won? It's like, it was like, you know, it was really cool in setting that precedent. Like, students could prove that because of what the CIA was doing was much worse, these students were justified in their demonstrations. In 1989, it was the first time ever that UMass had fee increases that meant that students who were working at minimum wage jobs for the first time ever couldn't afford to go to UMass. And so 3/4 of the student body protested, along with professors and whatnot. But this one was actually unsuccessful, as we know, because UMass is still very much unaffordable, and there continue to be student fee increases. And so a lot of what they realized is because at the time, during this time, UMass students were definitely from like lower income families. A lot more UMass students were from lower income families. And this is basically the start of UMass deciding to privatize the institution. And so from then on out, they admitted a lot more students from like from wealthier families. And so it's been a lot harder for them to protest fee increases because a lot of students don't care because it doesn't affect them. And so that's why one of the reasons why this wasn't successful. But it was really cool that like they got 3/4 of the student body to protest. So in 1997, we have the Alana protest, which this wasn't the first protest that the No Caucus has, which stands for Asian, Latin American, Native American. They had one in 1992, which led to the development of the No Caucus. And so essentially, they occupied Goodell for 6 days straight. And so originally they didn't plan on occupying Goodell, they just wanted to go in and stay there for a few hours. But so many people came out that they just stayed. And they had a lot of support from the 5 colleges. A lot of students from Hampshire College and like Glen Lake and whatnot came and supported them. They had support from the Collegian. The editor was like, everybody has a stake in what happens here. If the university decides to accept these demands, it's going to affect everybody, not just Alana students. And this is the most successful ever civil disobedience campaign in UMass's history because the university agreed to every single one of their 21 demands, which included like having more diverse faculty, retaining POC students, et cetera, but obviously now, even though they agreed to all 21 of these demands, pretty much a lot of the same issues that they're protesting for are still problems here on this campus. And so when we were doing our research, we realized that the person was talking about how like in 2003, UMass lost a lot of its funding, and so the first places to lose the funding on campus were like resources for a lot of students. And so that led to a lot of like the decline of like, okay, now we're going back to 1997 and dealing with the same exact issues. So for 2003, there is again another, what I just mentioned, another state budget cut. And so students and faculty protested. And this one, again, successful, but not in the sense that like UMass is was still arguing that like we can't control the funding we get from the federal government because like we can't control it. For 2004, this one actually left both of us shook because we were like, what? So basically at this point, up until this point, SGA was very, very conservative. And so a student by the name of Eduardo Bustamante won the presidency, but SGA's judiciary decided that it wasn't, like the way he won wasn't legal, I guess you could say. And so they were like, his election was invalid. And so that night, a few of the SGA members decided to dress up as KKK members and put up pictures of them as KKK on the web. And then people found out, and then you have the Take Back UMass campaign, which basically a whole bunch of people came together like, we can't stand for this, like, this is not okay. Why are they parading around as KKK members? That in itself is very problematic. But we can't stand for an SGA that's not willing to realize that it needs to be inclusive, it needs to represent its diverse population. And this is actually what leads to like a more progressive SGA, because then people start looking at like, okay, like what are we doing, who are we not electing, and who needs to be in our city government. In 2007, yet again, another student strike for a lot of students. But this one's really cool because the result of this protest led to the, I believe it's the day that UMass sends students to the State House to advocate for more federal funding came out of this protest. And so like they demanded that UMass give funds for students to do that, essentially. And so that was super successful in that sense, but again, we still have a problem with like lack of diversity and not helping, not retaining students of color here on campus. In 2008, a black student here at campus was being harassed by two white kids who didn't go to UMass, who broke the window in his dorm room, broke in and like started fighting him. He stabbed one of them out of self-defense, and then he gets arrested and is charged with assault. And so basically a whole bunch of like hundreds of UMass students came together, were protesting for Soy to be free, so like this is not fair. He didn't do anything, he was just defending himself, and neither of these white kids got in nearly as much trouble as he did. And so after a few years, he was in jail for, I want to say 3 or 4 years, and then he was finally released, but it did take a while for that. And then, so our most recent example of civil disobedience is the Divest movement. And so we didn't put up a slide because we know they're going to come here and talk about it, but the Divest started, I think, the school year, fall 2016, and that's all I'm going to say because they're going to talk.
Yeah.
Cool, thanks. Hey everyone, how you all doing? Good. Sweet. So my name is Micah. I joined the Divest UMass campaign the spring semester of my freshman year. I'm now a senior. And yeah, so there's a lot of stories that could be told about Divest UMass and its history and all the things that went into it and all of the people that went into making the campaign so powerful. But I just want to talk a little bit about the sit-in that happened spring semester of 2016. So quickly before I talk about that, how many of y'all were here spring semester of 2016? Cool. How many of y'all like went to the sit-in, knew about the sit-in, stuff that was happening? Cool, a lot of people. So I just want to start out by explaining what fossil fuel divestment is. So very simply, our university has an endowment fund of $770 million. It's invested in a lot of different industries, and part of it is in the fossil fuel industry. So divestment as a tactic is the opposite of investment. So it means to take the money out of the fossil fuel industry. And that's just part of the larger picture, but that's like the divestment portion of it. Does anyone want to read the mission statement? It's kind of long.
I'll do it.
We
are a UMass student power organization fighting for climate justice by demanding our institution divest from the top 200 publicly traded fossil fuel companies and reinvest in projects and funds that do not perpetuate racism, classism, sexism, and other systems of oppression. We organize to bring the crisis created by economic inequality and climate change to those who are responsible and challenge our university to take the bold action necessary to ensure a just future for its students, the Commonwealth, and the world.
Hey, thanks a lot. So that's a lot of things. Does anyone have any questions or like anything that's sticking out to them about this statement? Cool, I'll get into it a little bit more. So divestment is a tactic. So divestment as an organizing tactic has been used in other social movements like divestment from apartheid South Africa, like we just saw. The point of it is to both move money away from the fossil fuel industry to weaken it, and it's also a symbolic measure to publicly stigmatize the industry on moral grounds. So $770 million, first of all, not all of that is actually invested in the fossil fuel industry. It's just a small portion of it. And that, in the whole of the fossil fuel industry, is not actually a ton of money. Granted, there's a lot of different campaigns running to try to move money away from the industry, but a lot of the purpose of it is kind of a symbolic gesture, so the university can kind of like stand on more moral grounds and say that they're not investing in an unjust industry. And to go back to the mission statement a little bit, the point of Divest, so it says that it's a student power org. So ultimately, divestment as a tactic is in this much larger strategy to build student power. So that's to take power away from the administration, making all the decisions, and give it more to the students. So students have more say in how the university is run. So some quick facts about Divest. It's in its 5th year now. It's part of a large network of students organizing for fossil fuel divestment. And ultimately, it was the first large public university to commit to divest from the fossil fuel industry. Why civil disobedience? So this wasn't the first escalation. As I said, this is in its 5th year. At the time, it was in its 3rd year, I think, of being a campaign. So in the spring of 2015, there was a strategy session. And there it was decided that over a year, there'd be a series of escalations and build-ups to lead to fossil fuel divestment by the spring of 2016. So we didn't know what that escalation was going to look like necessarily and what it was going to look like to actually get the university to divest. That depended a lot on how all the other actions went in the negotiations leading up to the final goal of spring of 2016. And so there were a lot of different things happening. There are students going to Board of Trustees meetings, a lot of actions on campus. As you can see here, this is a campus center. In 2013, there's this dope, massive tarp-like thing with a message to the president at the time demanding divestment. And obviously it hadn't happened by 2016. So we crossed out President Corrett because it was no longer President Corrett. It was President Meehan. And he was one of our 2 targets along with the chairman, Victor Woolridge. And so we hung it up again and asked them again to divest. And they didn't. They didn't listen to us. So they gave us no choice but to disrupt business as usual and kind of bring the crisis to them if they weren't actually going to listen to all the negotiations that we had been a part of prior to that. So again, why sit in? So we had no choice but to escalate. The administration kept trying to stay on this like neutral ground and be like, we care, we really do, but like our hands are tied, we can't do it, and which is obviously not true. And they were kind of taking this stance that they were just like in the middle. They're like, we see both sides of the issue. We have this financial like obligation, but like care. And so we were trying to frame it as like, you can't be neutral on this issue. Like climate change isn't neutral. Investing in the fossil fuel industry isn't neutral. So you have to divest your money in order to actually stand on the side of justice. And another part of it was that we had gone to them so many times. Students had missed school to go to the Board of Trustees meetings, to go talk to them, missed classes. And so we decided that they are perfectly capable of coming to our school and coming to our place and negotiating with us. So we had to sit in. So this is the first video that we released leading up to the sit-in. So prior to this moment, there have been many a strategy session, conversations with student legal services, talking to the National Divestment Campaign Network, and we decided that a sit-in at UMass was the best tactic to move forward with. So I'm just going to show a quick video that we released in the week or 2 leading up to the sit-in to kind of frame the issue to the student body. The debate on climate change has been over for a long time. Any last doubts were shattered at the beginning of March when the planet hit a terrifying milestone. For the first time in recorded history, and likely all of human history, average temperatures across the northern hemisphere went above the 2-degree threshold, the point at which scientists have warned would signal dangerous and irreversible global climate change. This crisis has already claimed millions of lives and devastated thousands of communities, especially the poorest and those in the global south. But despite the unavoidable urgency of this global crisis, those who are most responsible have not been held accountable. The fossil fuel industry continues to worsen the devastation, and these companies continue to profit from the violent extraction of coal, oil, and natural gas, preventing a pathway to a better future. We are the ones who will inherit this crisis. We cannot stand by and watch as the future we want to live in a world that is just and sustainable is made impossible by the greed of the fossil fuel industry. That's why thousands of students all over the country are choosing climate justice. We are asking our colleges and universities to refuse to finance and profit from this destructive industry by divesting from all fossil fuels. We are the UMass Fossil Fuel Divestment Campaign, and we are a part of this movement. We've been working for 3 years to push the UMass Board of Trustees to stand with us and on the right side of history by divesting from fossil fuel companies.
We believe that as a public university, UMass has an opportunity and a responsibility to act in the best interest of the public, not private corporations.
Our school has divested from injustice before. UMass was among the first universities to divest from apartheid South Africa. The UMass community, made up of students, faculty, staff, and alumni at all 5 UMass campuses, agree. The time for full divestment is now.
In December, UMass divested from coal. With this decision, Chairman Woolridge and President Meehan proved that the UMass leadership believes in taking immediate action for climate justice and that divestment is possible and morally necessary. But coal was not enough.
Chairman Woolridge and President Meehan know that there is no time to wait to take the next step and divest the rest. We have asked again and again for our leaders to lead with us. Yet so far, the urgency of their actions has not paralleled the urgency of the climate crisis. We began to wonder what could be stopping our leaders from taking the obvious and necessary step to divest from all fossil fuels. What has been happening behind the closed doors of the people who manage our university's money? As we have searched for the answer to this question, what we have found is very alarming. Next week, we will release the information that has led us to ask an unsettling question. Do our UMass leaders have their hands tied by the private interests of fossil fuel companies? Something that stuck out to me during Stalon's presentation. Stalon mentioned to capitalize on drama, so we did. A lot. And so this was, we made the video for multiple reasons. One was to kind of frame the whole issue to the campus, so we kind of spread out on social media, through emails, through our networks, so that students, faculty, community would be able to understand why we were doing what we were doing, like what the campaign was really quickly, and to also get students like emotionally engaged and kind of see like the broader picture. And then the other half, as you saw towards the end, was about information that we had gathered from a lot of different sources helped us in finding this information, but it was about a lot of the administration and folks who are on the foundation who actually controls the endowment, which is a private institution within our public institution, which is a whole other issue. But they had a lot of ties to the fossil fuel industry, which is what we ended up talking about in the next video. And so, part of what we did is we also made these posters and hung them all around campus, which called out specific administrators for having these ties to the industry. Over there, Jack Welch, he is the largest donor to UMass, and he has all of these different ties to GE. I think he had some ties to like Trump. And I believe his quote was that climate change was a socialist plot in a case of mass neurosis. So we capitalized on using their language and a lot of things that they had said to kind of turn the tables and say, like, y'all are not on the right side of justice and need to come with us. Like, are you going to stay in their pockets or are you going to stand with students? So we released a second video, and I'm just going to show the last few seconds of it. Here. We, the students of the University of Massachusetts, cannot stand by while the leaders of our university are tied down by those who prioritize profit over people. Students are presenting our leaders with an opportunity to
prove that our institution is not beholden to private interests, and to uphold our university's mission statement, to improve the lives of the people of the Commonwealth, the nation, and the world. Chairman Woolridge and President Meehan have a choice: to remain in the pockets of an unethical industry, or to take a step to stand on the right side of history by divesting immediately from all fossil fuels. After 3 long years of demanding full divestment, students have not seen our leaders act with the urgency that this crisis demands. Now we are left with no other choice but to come together and raise our voices louder than ever before. It is time for our administration to lead with us.
That video also highlighted who our targets were, which were President Meehan and Chairman Woolridge. And that date was on all of the chops that we were handing out, all the flyers. It was a rally happening at the Student Union. And so as you all know, we had a sit-in, but that wasn't publicized until the day of the rally. So while the rally was happening, a few students had already gone and started sitting in Whitmore. So a day before the action, we had a nonviolent direct action training. About 40 to 50 people came. Some outside source came in who had a history of doing these trainings and talked to students about what their risks would be, what the history of nonviolent direct action was. And someone from Student Legal Services also came in to talk to students specifically about what they would be risking if they were to risk arrest, if they were to just participate in a sit-in. There are different levels of involvement that they could get involved with, and it was kind of just let students know what the risks would be. And so we had our demands of the sit-in. So originally we were planning to have the sit-in only until Wednesday. It ended up being a week long, but I'll get to that in a second. So the first day, we started with 21 students in Whitmore. And does anyone have any thoughts as to why maybe Whitmore was chosen? Or what Whitmore is for, what it does? They control the money. And that's also where a lot of the administrators were. So again, we were trying to be as kind of in their faces as possible. So the first day we had 21 students sitting in, and then that number went up to 100. Well, it went to 76 and then 100. And then I think it was on Wednesday, there was over 200 students, faculty members, community members, who had all come to sit in. And so every single time that Stalin mentioned training as being really important and something that was happening a lot. So as students started to show up who just heard of the sit-in, were getting excited, they would come to a nonviolent direct action training that would happen right outside of Whitmore, and then we would send them in. So no one went in without getting a quick training. And so so the sit-in happened for a week. It wasn't just the sit-in. There was a lot of other things happening. So while students were sitting in, there was also different workshops happening over here, led by students, led by different professors who were involved. Jill Stein came and rallied with us. This is also the time that FediWap came to campus, and we were tweeting at FediWap, trying to get him to support us. He didn't, but it was worth a check. And some other things that we did, so we had endorsement day. A lot of folks were calling in. And while this whole thing was happening, so while we had 200 some odd students and faculty members and everyone sitting in Whitmore, there's also negotiations happening. So a few of the members of the campaign were talking to administrators and negotiating throughout the day. Quick decisions were being made about arrests. So arrests were only used very strategically. The students who were getting arrested knew they were getting arrested and they were trained. And it was used for a very specific purpose. There was press releases going out. People were talking to media. So like you said, that there's a lot of different rules that were kind of happening all to create this really big force of power coming from different angles. So pressuring the university, both with negotiations, with the students, with communities, with Stein, and with the media. So this is just a few pictures. On, I think it was Tuesday, 15 students were arrested. We got pizza sent in from all around the country and some pizza from Australia. Yeah. And then, so we had rallies every day as well outside of Whitmore. And so this is for Thursday. we still hadn't gotten the demands that we had asked for, but so a lot of doing the sit-in and making these quick decisions was kind of deciding what the university was going to do before they knew they were going to do it. And so this is one of those things, is where we had a rally and invited Meehan to campus. He told us that we could come to him, we could go to his offices in Boston and communicate and negotiate. We're like, no, like, you're going to come here. Like, look, we made you a rally, and here's your podium. Like, yeah, just like doing it even if you didn't want to do it. And so eventually, by Friday, Meehan said that he wanted to make UMass the first public university in the country to divest our direct holdings from all fossil fuel companies. So it was a win at the end. So just like quickly about the sit-in. In the end, it was 5 days long, usually over 100 people sitting in and over 5 rallies. This took place during spring of 2016 when there was a national wave of action, so it wasn't just at UMass. By the end, over 800 students, faculty, staff, and community members had participated, and 34 students. It actually wasn't just UMass Amherst students. It was students from 5 colleges were arrested. And here's a quick video of the sit-in itself.
We are going up against a very powerful industry and very powerful people, and that is brave. And now, we need our leaders to be brave with us. We will walk with you and sing your spirit home. The point of this campaign is about the leader finally seeing the bravery and persistence and hope and imagination and beauty and love that people have that they are not acknowledging. We are the people too. We are united free. We will not stop until you divest. One. We are the people too. We are united free. We will not stop until you divest.
And they are risking parts of them being a student, their time as a student, the things that they could be doing. They are putting those things aside to make a statement bigger than the university's image. Climate change is bigger than the university's image. Our students are willing to prove that, and also willing to risk parts of their own lives to prove that.
And just to tell you where it is now, so I said that we had a campaign win, but we have yet to see their receipts. They now are not letting us speak at the Board of Trustees meetings, and there was no timeline for divestment, so I think it's safe to assume that they have not actually done the divesting part of divestment. But it's still a win. So many students had been activated by that point, and kind of like what was said in the mission statement, the final goal was about shifting power, and we did that. A lot of students were empowered to take action and to act collectively, and were given power in making decisions about the school's resources. So yeah, so civil disobedience, the reason why this is so effective was because it was a tool to shift power, not just because we were getting arrested to get arrested or sitting in just to sit in and get this one thing done, but it was about building power with a group of students so that we can hopefully in the future hold the university accountable. Thanks.